Everybody, this is Perch. One of the cooler parts about the 80s comics that you don't hear a lot of is sort of I don't know, I always resist when you hear people say the punk rock scene of comics. It always feels like somebody trying to co-opt something that they believe is cool over here and try and make it, it's like, oh, we're like that cool thing that you've heard about over there. We're not that cool thing, but we're like it. Always feels like how some of this stuff is. But there's a lot of indie underground comics out there in the past. A lot of really cool books that used to exist, and they really don't exist anymore. I mean, kind of the Ed to Score, the Red Room, and some of that kind of stuff kind of gets you there. It definitely has that feel to it, but it's like a tiny attempt in otherwise kind of a sea of a lot of the same stuff. And so, but I do like that. I like that underground feel that used to exist in comics that we don't see anymore. This writer is writing in talking about some of that. It says, "Hey Perch, the recent news about Eric July and the success of his Rippaverse has got me thinking about how the underground comic scene has changed over the years. Once upon a time, you had a diverse scene that could encompass the likes of Robert Crumb, Daniel Close, Art Spiegelman, Kevin Eastman, Dave McKean, Richard Corbin, Alejandro Jahosky, Pat Mills, and Alan Moore." Now, one of those names doesn't seem quite like the others, but I'll take it. I'll take it. All writers and artists with their distinct takes on the world and created work that was unlike anyone else. Nowadays, it seems like CG has become the underground, and to my eyes, most of the creators involved simply want to recapture the glory days of the 80s and 90s. While I'm not criticizing them, I do find it indicative that the supposed counterculture seems to be merely a nostalgic retread when, to me, it should be pushing things forward and creating stuff unlike anyone else. Curious to get your take on this. Well, let's get the easy part out of the way first. This has nothing to do with a CG or any of that kind of stuff, and please don't. I don't think you need to kind of bend over backwards to apologize. Like, I don't want to offend that group. And this goes for any mainstream CG, any kind of group. I mean, people should be allowed to kind of, make your opinion, state it out there. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to immediately apologize for it. I think that a lot of the CG books, from, my general observation, and I'm sure many people will come in to disagree with it, they do try and they're trying to capture that 90s feel of storytelling, be it because those are the bigger artists and creators that get promoted, and a lot of the books have that if you are classifying it that general area. Is that all the books? No, of course not. There's always outliers, but I think it's fair to say. I think what you said is fair. I think that it does hit there. But regardless, I don't think that group or any group has to do the underground scene, but I do miss the underground scene. I think that one thing that doesn't exist, a counterculture of comics, if you will. There isn't a true, we're giving you something completely different. There is lots of, we're giving you something you don't see in the mainstream today. That absolutely exists, and that has value. Make no mistake about it. Absolutely has value, and there are people clearly opening their wallets to go and grab it. I would make this argument. This may, this will piss off a completely different group of people. The reality is the people who are doing the counterculture, a lot of those names you mentioned, Crumb and Spiegelman and folks like that, other than Alan Moore, didn't achieve massive financial success. And even Alan Moore, despite the fact that he had a bunch of big things come through, a lot of that money went to DC or went to others. It didn't actually go to Alan Moore. He got paid, but not nearly as much as the companies made off of his work. But a lot of the other names on that list, I mean, they became famous. They became kind of poster children or main names for counterculture, but they didn't actually sell a lot. It's true. They were true counterculture. They were the Disney and the big package mainstream media, the Spider-Mans and the Batmans. They were making tons of money. These creators were truly the alternative. And one unspoken thing about the alternative, it's very cool to be the alternative. You definitely want to have if you're going up to a bar and you're trying to pick up that chick to take her home, you don't want to say, yeah, I'm with the mainstream. You want to be part of the cool, the counterculture. And that's what you know, several of these creators are, but they didn't make a lot of money doing so. And so if you are setting out to try and kind of sell your comic book, make money, and one thing about the the CG group, I would say again as a very generic blanket statement, is one of the big talking points is, we actually want to make money. There's a whole go woke, woke, broke, all those kinds of slogans. And so if you are going out there saying, I'm going to make a true comic and I don't care if I make money or not, it doesn't really fit with the brand. And a lot of the counterculture stuff needs to exist for maybe art's sake as opposed to financial profit's sake. And that's where it gets kind of muddied, because that's the accusation that's often lobbed at the big two these days. But I don't think they're certainly not doing counterculture work either. Like I said, not many people are. I think Ed Piscor is probably the guy, and then there's some other people we don't hear of, and maybe that's kind of the point. But I wish there was more room for pure subculture, that kind of comic, that kind of work, because there is a raw energy and excitement to a lot of that stuff that you don't see really much of anywhere these days. That kind of rawness to the work. It's one of the things that I like about Larry King's work, and I did the book with him. Jim and I jumped here a year ago, and he had that kind of style. It's a little bit of that subculture, counterculture feel. I'm always a big fan of that kind of stuff, and I wish there was more room for it. But the current battle is really around the desire to kind of bring back maybe classic comic storytelling versus what the big two are doing, which is say we're going to go out and reach new readers. And that's a current battle. Nobody's doing we're going to create the raw, uncensored subcultural counterculture work that was always really cool. The thing I liked about those comics, beyond just the fact that they were new and different and very experimental in a lot of cases, is that they did become good idea boards for what mainstream comics would become. And it's a lot of mainstream writers and creators either got their start in subculture comics, or they read them and were inspired by them and were able to take some of that work to provide some good energy to the comic books that they wrote. And I think there's a lot of writers and artists that came up in the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s that came from that direction. And so if we've lost that today, if we don't have that, then it means the inspiration, a lot of that kind of early work that gets people very excited, it doesn't exist. It's coming from somewhere else. And I think we're seeing the impact of what it means to not have that influence on writers today. And I think that's a shame. But anyway, I don't know. I love those books. I think there's a lot of them. You've inspired me to go and grab a few and review some, because I think there's some really crazy, good, raw work out there that was the old subculture. And I'd love some recommendations. I mentioned Piscor. I'd love some other people out there who have some ideas of where some of that subculture is today. Where do you go find it? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course, and thanks for listening.